Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming with myself, Hollow, for some more Elden Ring. And I believe this might be my last tier list video for a while. This time we're talking about the weapon types themselves, of which there are actually quite a lot in Elden Ring. It's been interesting for me to go back and look through, like, say, the different whips, the different thrusting swords, the different straight swords, and remember all of the different types and what I think about them. But as a core, we're talking about the weapons themselves. So when I talk about great swords today, I'm not talking about specifically, say, the Dark Moon Greatsword, but greatswords as a concept, their movesets, how good are they in general? And with that, we've of course got a big list to go through, so let's begin. This is our tier list here. This time we do have D. I usually only have S, A, B, and C, but there's a special spot for D, which we'll get to. With all of that said then, let's begin. We're going to pick, as I just mentioned them, the greatswords. Greatswords are pretty much the biggest variety of weapons. There are so many greatswords and so many particularly good greatswords at that. As a baseline, this is a weapon with a very solid moveset. Nice vertical attacks, horizontal attacks, good in single target, good in AoE, and there's so many of them with unique special ashes of war, great base numbers, great scaling. What's interesting about greatswords is you can begin the game and have a greatsword and do well, and you can end the game with an incredible greatsword doing very well. You can PvE, you can PvP. These are just a universal, all-rounder, good style of weapon, and something I've loved using from the very beginning when I first started the series back in Demon Souls. You really can't go wrong with them, so I think they truly deserve the S tier spotlight. Let's drop a peg here to A with some straight swords. Straight swords, on the other hand, are a bit worse in terms of the variety of what you can do. They're of course very straight in their design, so they're much more thrusting and more repetitive in their moveset. However, I think their DPS potential and output is absolutely insane, especially when we're talking power stance. I absolutely love using these things. And there's also a great variety of them in Elden Ring. The problem with these for me though is they are just like a worse greatsword in terms of their moveset and also the variety of them. I really like them, but I think it's fair to compare the two and say that straight swords is just a bit worse than the greatswords found in the game. Which perfectly brings us down another level to B with thrusting swords. Now I must admit there are two types of thrusting swords. There's like the heavy ones and then the more standard ones like your standard rapier. But ultimately, these are your swords with an even simpler moveset. Just thrusting and poking generally, right? That means they have good range, and they do have some flashy moves as well, but their Ashes of War are quite limited, not so effective in PvP, and in PvE, they're not amazing as well, and there's also not a massive selection of them. I do think their output is good, and they're perfectly fine weapons to use in all scenarios, but compared to straight swords, they're just a bit worse. And again, there's even less of them. Sadly, I actually think the showing of thrusting swords is worse in Elden Ring than earlier in the series. I loved them in, say, Dark Souls 1 for whatever reason. But let's come back up instead of continuing down to curved swords, which I think are absolutely incredible in Elden Ring and from the whole series in general. These have really quick attacks, really fun movesets. That sweeping attack of the curved sword always does it for me. And they also have the cool backflip, much like the special backstep of the rapier. Again, though, there's not a massive selection of these, but the few that are there are really good, especially when we're talking about, say, the Magma Blade here, or of course the Wing of Estelle, one of the best in the game. The running attack of the power stance curved swords, one of the best if not the best roll catch in the game as well for PvP, and I love them, great output. But I think due to the lacking variety of them in Elden Ring, to my own surprise, there's a few standout great examples, but they just don't compete to the universal wow, great swords are good in Elden Ring, if you get my meaning. Here's an interesting one then. Let's talk about daggers, which are problematic in Elden Ring due to their really terrible range. You've just got nothing with these things. However, you do attack super quick, and there's so many ways to improve your damage with successive attacks that you can get some serious DPS with these things. If you're able to attack a target many times, you can really hurt it. The problem is that pathetic range, and they're also very easy to parry because they're constant attacking. Daggers with a tiny weight make for a great Ash of War tool though for quick step or Bloodhound's dash. Or you could address the tiny range problem by using Ashes of War that have range, such as, yes, the Blade of Death there. So I like using quite a few daggers, and I reckon they're better than the very comparable claws or fist weapons of Elden Ring, which have basically the same range, basically the same moveset, but there's more bleed versions of them, which is stronger, of course. But I just don't think they have a great answer to their tiny range in the way that many daggers do. So I like claw weapons, I like fist weapons, but damn do they have issues. Cool as hell, but you know that you're putting a sort of personal challenge on yourself when you use them. Speaking of personal challenges when you use them, what about the whips? I actually think they go into B grade, and that's, I guess, largely down to the fact that there's bleed versions. Much like the claws, you've got great output if you're using a bleed weapon against a bleedable target. But there are some whips that don't have that, such as the Red Giant's Braid there. These things have great range and really fun movesets in PvE or PvP. The problem is you're not usually going to stagger your target when you hit them, so you have to be very, very clever with how you use them. Their moveset allows for that, and that's why I think they're one of the funnest weapons in the game, especially Elden Ring. But they're just not that effective as a baseline. Speaking of weapons I like, the hammers, which sadly I think also belong in C. Much like the daggers and the claws and the fist weapons, they have tiny range and a satisfying moveset, especially in power stance. The fact that you're able to break guards and such with these blunt weapons, it's very fun. But yeah, tiny range, not amazing damage. Well, this unfortunately makes for a lacking weapon type. Plus, there's barely any weapons to choose between, so you're stuck using one of the same version, or maybe one of the musical horns, in combination with Marika's hammer there. I would love to see some more hammer options in, say, a DLC, and maybe with some buffs to the damage, hopefully. Here's another weapon I'm massively disappointed by in Elden Ring. That's axes. There's so many axes in this game that just feel like underwhelming. Obviously, our friendly frosty axe there was insane in the original game thanks to its Ash of War, and it has a nice baseline moveset. But it's quite simple as well, as effective as it was originally. Very simple. Not that effective. There's barely any of them in the game, and they also suffer from tiny range, much like the hammers. And I have a huge gripe with axes in general, especially the bigger ones that are coming to the Colossal weapon type, that don't even have axe movesets. They just have like a hammer Colossal weapon moveset, which really bothers me. So I suppose we should talk about that next. Colossal weapons are strong as hell in Elden Ring. There's plenty of them with huge AR, big hits, big staggering value, and some quick attacks to mix up with the slow attacks if you're doing, say, a crouch or rolling attack. In many cases, they're effective and great weapons, and the highest hitting weapon is, in fact, a colossal weapon in the form of the Giant's Crusher. Problem is, like I say, my god, it's a repetitive moveset. There is quite a lot of colossal weapons, and they all have the same hammer moveset. Really bothers me when things that shouldn't have the hammer moveset have it. But I can't deny how effective these weapons are, and it's fun to just use a big weapon and bonk targets. And I think it's very, very fair for me to say that colossal swords stand above your standard colossal weapons, thanks to their more varied moveset. They also come with some of the coolest designs in the game. Our various Guts cosplayers are always happy with these. Even the base colossal sword, the Greatsword, I love that weapon, I always have. The crouching poke is one of the strongest attacks you can use in the game for both PvE and PvP. It's just silly how effective it is. And then because they're a big heavy weapon, you know, you're staggering enemies and you're doing big damage. Plus, so many of them have incredible Ashes of War, all those designs. Or like, say, the Greatsword, you can put any Ash of War on them, like the big hitting quick ones with hyper armor. They're probably my favorite weapon type in the game. So S tier pick, 100%. Before patch 1.04, that might have been maybe just an A pick, but they did buff up the damage when you two-hand them, and their attack speed, which is really important. How about another classic weapon that I've always loved? The spears. Good range, good damage, but a simple and repetitive moveset because mostly just thrusting. There are actually a few interesting spears in Elden Ring though, like say the sword spear with a unique vertical attack, or the one that I've got here, Vike's Spear, which is a madness spear. Really cool. But sadly, there's actually very few options for having spears in Elden Ring. Whether you're using the big ones or the standard ones, you've got a similar moveset, a great running heavy attack, one of the best in the game, in fact, for PvP. And I've always really liked them. I had a whole build dedicated around them for Dark Souls 3 PvP and had a great time with it. I do think they did well in Elden Ring, but I'd love to see more options and more of those cool, unique movesets. What about a weapon that I begrudgingly think is good, but I'm disappointed by in Elden Ring? Well, that would be the Reapers, aka the Scythes. There are not many Scythes in the game, but they are all pretty good, especially the Faith ones. You've got like a heavier strength one, you've got like the Dex one, but their designs are so boring, man, I swear. The Wing Scythe's a good one, but I don't like its design. The Scythe there, is literally just a farming scythe. I admit, when you power stance these weapons, they're very effective with their range, so I recognize they're effective weapons, but they're so lacking in Elden Ring. Like, remember Bloodborne's Scythe that you get at the end of the game, Gehrman's Scythe? That was incredible. By comparison, Elden Ring Scythes are just so bland. Give me some cooler Scythes, please. They're a really cool weapon. I main Reaper in Final Fantasy XIV, so I'm very upset. Here's another really cool weapon type, though. The twin blades, which I also think are a B. More of the top of the pack of B here, but it's because there's barely any of them. And I admit their moveset's a bit awkward in PvP. Their range is shockingly low. In PvE, I quite like them. You got like the jumping power stance attack. That can put out some of the highest DPS potential in the game. And there's some cool designs like the Godskin Peeler there, where you've got like a scythe end, a curved sword end, and then the poker, which makes for a fun and versatile moveset. Plus, you look like some sort of Jedi or Sith when you buff these up with the greases. They're a cool weapon, but I just don't think they're one of the best. They're just like just under an A tier pick for me. What is an A tier pick for me, though, I reckon, is the underrated halberds. There's not a major amount of them, but I reckon they're all pretty damn good. Especially the Knight Rider's one here in particular as one of the best strength weapons in the game. You got nice range, right? But then you also got sweeping attacks in challenge to the repetitive and simple moveset of, say, the spears. You can do a lot with these things with some cool Ashes of War as well. Some of the coolest go on spears and halberds, and so are underused and underrated because of it. So yeah, I like halberds. I'd also like to see more of them in Elden Ring. All right, now I'm going to do a couple in one go here. I'm talking about the bows, I'm talking about the crossbows, and say the ballista. Let's pretend the crossbow here is ballistas. They are ultimately a bit of a weird weapon in all of the Souls series. They've gradually got better. Like the black bow is an example there. It's like a long bow that is used as a short bow. Quick attacking, spammable attacks, cool Ashes of War, and you can attack enemies from really far away, making for some funny sort of cheese situations. The pulley crossbow can be good in PvP, especially when you're putting someone to sleep to then combo them with a big hitting weapon. And say the ballista or the great bow, you know, they're going to be slower hitting setup weapons that can make for some funny scenarios in PvP. Overall, they're just not that deadly as a weapon to pull out, but they have a lot of utility, like pulling out a bow to fire a fire arrow at a fire vulnerable enemy. That can be really useful. Flails, come on, you knew what it was going to be. Flails are terrible in Elden Ring, and they were first introduced to the series in this game, which really upsets me. It's incredible. They only put a few, like 3 or 4 in the entire game, and all of them aren't that good. They're a fun weapon. They're just not that good. Small range, silly moveset that's just not that effective, DPS potential low, irrelevant in PvP. But they're so cool. I'm so sad. I think they really need to get some like big heavy flails and give them some real damage. Maybe in a DLC, but for now, they are the worst weapon type in the game. Last but not least then, this should be a no-brainer as well. Katanas. There's so many good katanas in this game. They're a baseline weapon that comes with bleed just as a standard, with one of the best movesets in the entire game. Whether you like it or not, katanas are effective. They have great range, great slow staggered combos for PvP, insane output potential, especially with the bleed katanas, or say Moon Veil, Rivers of Blood. You know, need I say more? These things are insane, and they've been great in the series from the very beginning, and easily one of my favorite weapon types ever. What can I say? I guess I'm just a weeb. And now I've reorganized the list so that left is the most effective and right being the least effective in its individual grade. This was kind of a weird video for me to make because, yeah, we're talking about weapon types and there's a lot of different variants in each specific type, but it's interesting to look back and review like, wow, God, there were so many greatswords, and yet there were like absolutely no twin blades. There was barely any axes, barely any hammers. Some weapon types just got nothing. I wonder if we'll see that balance changed a bit in a DLC. For now though, that's been the video. If you've enjoyed it, please do drop a like and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Otherwise, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.